Now, for more on this, we're joined live by Dr. John Bruni from Sage International for a detailed look at the deadly attack in London. Doctor, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you've just heard Tony Abbott's comments there. What do you think of them?
Look, I mean, there are a lot of things that he said which I agree with and some that I don't agree with. I mean, one of the things that I'm very critical of at this point in time is the over-militarised responses we seem to be having trotted out in the media at the moment, because it makes politicians appear to be on top of the situation when clearly they're not. All over the West, we've seen that we've been trying to put forward military solutions, and in essence what we're doing is we're actually alienating communities within our own states. We need to come up with a more subtle and better targeted approach.
It was an interesting point he said, where he said that we need to crack down hard on people justifying terrorism, jihadis loose on our streets. The point that I would make is that over the past couple of years, we've seen a real shift in the way that terrorists operate, from essentially planned sorts of terrorism attacks like we saw in London back in 2005, where there were 4 people who had bombs and they took to the underground. That's now, of course, led to more security right across Britain, and now they've turned to cars or to vans. Is terrorism becoming harder to stop?
Look, it is, and unfortunately, by dint of always being able to publicise the misdeeds of these individuals, and let me say something quite clearly here. There is nothing Islamic about the actions of random violence perpetrated by people who are criminally deranged, as we've seen in London, as we've seen in Manchester, as we've seen in Paris and elsewhere. These people do not deserve to be linked to Islam in any way, shape or form. As a matter of fact, one could say that they are, heretics in their own mindset, and using the Arabic word there, majnoon, which is insane. This is something that is really a policing effort that needs to be looked at from a mental health perspective more than anything else at all.
Dr. Bruni, I just want to pick you up on your last point that this has nothing to do with Islam. I mean, the boss of ASIO, Duncan Lewis, said last week that this has to do with radical Sunni Islam, and we've seen research that shows that a proportion of Muslims in various countries around the world justify acts like suicide bombings and terror. So I'm just wondering how you separate that from Islam itself. Isn't this a radical form of Islam that these terrorists and extremists are practicing?
These are labels that we give what we see, and I think that to a degree it's almost become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I can also point out that there is a huge academic literature out there that also suggests that mental health plays a huge role in seeing the pathology of people who are obviously deranged, moving into the lone wolf territory, or finding fellow travellers on the dark web and trying to perpetrate atrocities. This is also something that's out there in the public domain, and no one wants to talk about it. This is the uncomfortable truth. What we're doing is we're literally militarizing a response to what is a critically important mental health issue. And let me go back one step. I mean, we talk about Islam, Islamist terrorism, jihadism. By using these labels, by calling out this kind of atrocity at an individual level, something that it is not, we are giving the people who are perpetrating these acts of violence a cause. We should be stepping away from that cause. We should be not giving them the labels that they want, they crave and they desire. And what we've just seen in London, unfortunately, I can already tell you, I can predict we're going to find out from the media the names of the perpetrators involved. Eventually we'll find out about the families who supported those people, and so on and so forth. And all they'll end up doing is becoming the poster children of the next group of criminally deranged people, psychopaths, sociopaths, call them what you will, but do not link them in any way, shape or form to religion. I think that this is one of the major problems that we've had since 9/11. We need to be tough on these people, to be sure. The policing actions need to be much more subtle. I think that it's a mistake to try to over-militarize things. We want to see police on the streets and we think that we're doing something. But in actual fact, all we're doing is we're fomenting the very fear that we're trying to step up, trying to avoid. And this is something that we need to come to grips with.
But if you say that it has, I mean, I've heard this argument before that we shouldn't call it Islam, we shouldn't call it religion, but then by the same account you're saying, well, that the danger of doing that is that we're isolating communities and it might be inspiring other Muslims and people within those communities to take up arms and do something similar. Isn't that a contradiction?
It's not a contradiction at all. No, absolutely not. It's how you see it. If you see someone, say for instance, I'll give you a very simple example. There was a spate of king hits that were, in Sydney nightclubs, and people thought that this is a really terrible thing because the name king hit gave the term meaning. If all of a sudden we call them coward punches or something that isn't heroic in stature, it doesn't look quite as inviting for the people that would want to perpetrate that kind of thing. That isn't to suggest that there aren't going to be those individuals who are unhinged that won't perpetrate acts in the name of something, but it will take the oxygen out of the room. We need to take it down a few notches in order for us to actually get on top of the situation in a rational way. And look, I'll tell you something about, the Islamic world and how everything is going on there. There is an idea that's also prevalent in the community, that because it all comes from Islam, they're all Arabs, they're all this, they're all that, we play into this kind of groupthink about something that is actually quite complex. We need to stop doing that because the very communities, whether it be in the UK, whether it be in Australia, whether it be in the United States or elsewhere in the West, we will end up turning on each other in a very vicious manner. And we shouldn't do that. We should not do that.
Doctor, if we look at the response by British police, of course, from the moment they received that call, 8 minutes later, the terrorists were dead. Turning our attention to here in Australia, how do you think authorities here are prepared to deal with a similar incident? Of course, every terrorist incident is different, but do you have faith that Australian authorities could produce an equally effective outcome?
That's an interesting question. I think that at an individual level, you will have members of counter-terrorism squads embedded within various police institutions, state and territory, that are very, very good at what they do. But it's not at that level that we're seeing the potential problems. What we're seeing in Australia in particular is the federal nature of everything. And also the fact of the matter is that, Adelaide and Hobart are not, suburbs of Western Sydney, and so therefore we can't just call 2 Commando out. We can't call the SAS, which is out in Western Australia, out. We need to then redeploy those very scarce assets all over our major capital cities, and that in itself is a huge logistics problem. So if we want to have a timely response, we need to look very seriously at the policing counter-terrorism squads that are embedded within every policing authority in state or across our states and territories to make sure that they have proper command, proper training, and that there is unity of purpose at the political, the judiciary, and at the policing levels. Because if we don't have that, you won't get on top of it at a tactical level at all.
Dr. Bruni, it's not just about the policing and the military, as you say. There are a lot of other issues which can really be found by people and their past history. We saw this incident on board that Malaysian Airlines flight out of Melbourne last week, where the man believed to have checked out just that day before or the morning of the incident from a mental health facility. How do you try to maintain that you can get people and make sure that they can't leave and then go onto a plane without also stopping people from the ability to check in and check out, because that would stop people from checking themselves in?
I think your viewers are quite well aware of the fact that here in Australia we do have funding problems with regard to mental health institutions, and we just don't have enough people to man those particular critical nodes of health, essentially. And in the current climate of budgetary cutbacks and so on and so forth, we're not being able to get people on the ground who will be able to determine whether or not someone that has a problem should be released back into the community. And this is a major problem for us because, as I say, if one of the primary issues that we're facing at the moment globally is that we have a number of individuals who are in the community, embedded within our communities essentially, that do have these problems, and they're not being treated, they're not being looked at for the problems that they actually have, then they can easily link themselves with any overseas group that they wish to. The fact of the matter is that their primary root cause and motivation is not being addressed, and that is a funding issue in the mental health sector across the board, I would imagine.
Well, look, I mean, the Lint Cafe, the state coroner in the Lint Cafe siege inquest dismissed the idea that man Haron Monis was deranged. That was something that the psychiatrist had said. So, I mean, we have seen terrorists here. where we've dismissed the idea of mental health issues. But I just want to ask you one more thing before we can let you go, Dr. Bruni. British Prime Minister Theresa May said that she outlined a 4-point plan in dealing with terrorism, and the number one thing was to recognise British values and Western values as superior to these extremist values. I know you don't like the label Islam, but extremist Islamist values. Do you accept that Western values are superior?
Well, of course. I mean, most people come to the West because they want to escape the traumas of their old country, and so therefore we have something that is inherently attractive. But having said that, to defend what we have, we can't go down the slippery slope of trying to look for, you know, overly simplistic solution to something that is actually quite a complex problem.
Dr. Bruni, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.